everyone, I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. In this episode, I talk with Kucera, who has championed healthy practices professionally for over a decade and personally her whole life. She is a licensed chiropractor, a certified Ayurvedic practitioner, registered yoga teacher and therapist, and entrepreneur. She is the founder of Sage, a healing arts center located in Kansas City, Missouri, where she combines all of these methods to help others find well-being. In this episode, we learn more about what Ayurvedic practices are, what a dosha is, the 3 different types, and why it is beneficial to your health to know yours. Like, what is the best time to eat for good digestion? Why certain rituals or routines are best for you? What foods serve you best? We also discuss the benefits of dry brushing and tongue cleaning, and she shares which type of tongue cleaner is best. Sarah then shares her book, The Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook, which covers holistic healing rituals for every day and in every season, anywhere from sleep, digestion, skin, hormones, and more. Enjoy the episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. I truly do this to help you live your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Thank you, and welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's just hear about you and your background and how you got started in Ayurveda practices.
Yeah. So I have studied Ayurveda, so I have a master's degree in Ayurveda, but I originally went to school for exercise science as my undergraduate degree. And after spending some time in that field, I kind of realized that wasn't the end of the road for me. And so I went on to chiropractic college. And then from chiropractic college, I had been studying a lot of yoga, practicing yoga, taking lots of workshops, studying to become a teacher, and knew that when I graduated from chiropractic college, I wanted to blend those practices together. So that was kind of the next point when I graduated, to make sure that I was in a space that allowed for that. And it was actually at that point that I learned about Ayurveda, because Ayurveda is a sister science to yoga. So I was learning through just first and foremost, just the exposure that I had to it. Mm-hmm. And then took some informal classes, more workshop style, and then really felt a strong connection to it. So I decided to study it more formally, and I sought out a program that was not close to me and did kind of a long cross-country commute once a month for several years. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard you talking about that, like California, right? You would go there like every month. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. And, I didn't think about it at the time, because I'm sure, like everyone else, that when it's something that you want to do, you prioritize it and you don't think about how grueling it might be at the time. But it was kind of tiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's so cool to learn in person, especially nowadays. It's good to have that experience.
Yeah.
In chiropractor, it's changed a lot. I mean, they do a lot more holistic medicine and that kind of thing, which is cool. I think that they've really shifted. I don't know what they kind of, it used to just be go there, get an adjustment. Now they're really a lot more holistic. I think it's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I actually think that chiropractors are finally stepping into their, I want to say stepping into their powered. I don't mean it in like a strong, aggressive sort of way, but stepping into their expertise, because when we are in college, we don't just learn about like adjustments. We basically have the same basic sciences as medical degrees and osteopathic degrees, and we learn so much more. So it's almost crazy in some ways to go to your chiropractor and just spend a minute or two with them getting an adjustment and nothing else, when there's so much more that we can offer. So.
Oh, for sure. I had a guy just last night, the chiropractor is the one that sent him over for his neck, and so, I mean, I've taken care of quite a few of them as students, and, it's a hard program to go through, actually. Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about your book. It's really great. I read it, and I thought I would just show it. It's so cute. Let's talk about it, why you wrote it, and what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea for the book, I don't think I'm in the minority of someone that has always wanted to write a book. I've had that aspiration for quite a long time. And the idea for this book came to me when I was in my Ayurvedic program. I was actually in the last stages of getting my master's degree. So I was doing my thesis work around the impact of routine on health, because what I was finding personally when I was working with people is that people would have these really solid health practices, but they had very, very inconsistent lives, that they might eat at different times, they would go to bed at different times, their exercise would be really inconsistent. And it was all with the best intention. They were doing things that maybe they would hear were really healthy for them, and they were overall, but there just was no structure. So when it came time to doing my thesis work, I really wanted to focus on that, because the foundation of Ayurveda is really in the context of preventive health. And if we're only looking at things like herbal therapies or different body work, or even just like handing someone a food list, I feel like we're really missing out on the things that people need to know. Like if we want to give someone the instruction manual to their health and to things that should feel good, it should include these things such as what your day should look like. So I had done a little bit of a pilot study, just a small sample of like 275 people that I surveyed and asked them questions about their routine and their health. And it was pretty interesting, because truly the results came back as I had kind of suspected. So no bias there. But people that may not have had the like quote healthiest practices, but were very consistent, were the healthiest people. So they weren't the ones that were eating all the superfoods and doing all the tongue cleaning and dry brushing and oil pulling and all of that, but they were doing maybe minimal things. Maybe they weren't eating the diet that would have looked like the healthiest diet, but they were the healthiest. And so that's where I really felt like we need to highlight this, that this is something really beautiful that Ayurveda offers. And if we're only talking about doshas, or we're only talking about Ayurvedic herbs and adaptogenic herbs and those sorts of things, that like one of the most beautiful and applicable parts of Ayurveda is really being left out. So that's where that came from for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love in the book how you give great self-study tips and ideas. Mm-hmm. And because I really feel like that's where the growth takes place, when you're truly reflecting on that information, that self-awareness and how you can actually implement it in your life. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there anything that surprised you in researching for the book that maybe you didn't know?
I had done so much work around my thesis, and my thesis was written from a different perspective, because it wasn't written, it was written in an academic format, not in a format for the public to read. So a lot of that had already, I think, there weren't any surprises around the book itself, the research I did for the book, because that had already been established. I think like there are parts of writing a book that maybe were sort of surprising, like the actual book writing process itself. But in terms of content, there wasn't a lot that I can say that was a surprise. Yeah.
It flowed very well. I think you did a great job. Well, why don't we just, for those people that are not aware of what Ayurveda means, what does that word mean? And when and where did the practice originate?
Ayurveda, when you break it down, it means the science of life, or Ayur is, or it could be like the knowledge of life, wisdom of life. So Veda is the word that stands for science or knowledge. And then Ayur or Ayu is life. So we have a word that literally means the science of life. And this is a practice that comes from India. It is very old, as many things that come from India are. The oldest texts are dating back to around 5,000 years ago. And these are things that, if you look at the more traditional texts and things that we use as our foundation in learning about Ayurveda, they are still applicable. It's not that something 5,000, it's actually quite surprising that something that old could still be relevant, but it's because the whole system is based on nature. Mm-hmm. And though nature does shift a little bit, when we look at nature as a whole, we still have the same rhythms. We still have, our seasons maybe have changed a little bit, and our climate has changed, but we still have our light dark cycle. We still have so many things that are the same. So the way that nature affects us is also very similar to how it was that long ago. So this practice is quite old. I mentioned that it is coupled with yoga, that the two practices are considered to be sister sciences. So when you look at the two things together, you have yoga, which is really meant to be more about like a medicine for the mind, whereas Ayurveda is more of the medicine for the body. But of course, we know, especially in our Western culture, that yoga can also be for the body. Mm-hmm. And we also know that Ayurveda can absolutely be for the mind. So it's more that they were meant to complement one another. And I've always personally looked at the two as they match up or pair up as being one sort of like a spiritual path, and you had mentioned self-study, so there's lots of self-study in both practices. That yoga has a lot of that piece to it, even though, again, we're often using our body as a tool. Mm-hmm. And then if we look at Ayurveda, it's kind of like what we need to use to stay healthy so that we can maintain the work on that particular path of self-discovery or self-evolution. So so even though this practice comes from the East, it's meant for everyone. It's not that I've actually been asked before, like, if I work with Ayurveda, do I have to eat Indian food? And like, that would be a great prescription if you ask me, but no. Like, I would love to have just, a diet filled with Indian food, but yeah, it's meant to be used by everyone, everywhere. It doesn't have to be exclusive to the East. Mm-hmm.
I feel like we even need it more now that, I really literally had nothing really known about it until I read your book. Can you talk about the Ayurvedic elements that you talk about in the book and the concept of gunas? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You said that was really important.
It's so important. And I kind of get passionate about different things, and I remain passionate about these things. So like right now I have a slightly different focus in the things that I'm doing than when I wrote the book. Mm-hmm. And likewise, gunas and elements were something that I was super into, and still am, but for a moment it was probably a little bit stronger within me. Yeah. So when we talk about elements and gunas, or which are also called attributes or descriptors, or different qualities, maybe we would call them qualities. These are things that we use to describe nature. So again, nature being like the most foundational thing within Ayurveda, that we are a part of nature. And so if we are living in harmony with nature, we're much more likely to be healthy. If we go against nature, whether that's our external nature or our inner nature, like saying that I'm not living in accordance with my true nature, then I would become sick. It's just the same. So nature is huge, and one of the ways that we can be a little more descriptive about what that means in us in terms of body or mind or even in our environment is to look at it in the concept of 5 elements. Mm-hmm. So Ayurveda breaks down nature into 5 elements, which we call ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Ether is also the same as saying space. So it's it's the most vast, expansive element that we have. Air is air, and it could also be akin to saying something kind of like wind, because air is also the only mobile element. And then we know fire, we know water, and then when we talk about earth, we're talking about the ground. So these 5 elements exist in everything. They exist in everyone. But the reason why things in our world look different, and why people look different, and why we have different personalities and appearances is that these elements are in different amounts, and they also have different expressions. So what that could mean is that you and I may have, we definitely both have ether, air, fire, water, and earth, but I may have more fire where you may have more air. And even if we both had the same amount of air, we had the same amount of fire in me may be expressed through more physical attributes, or it might be expressed in the context of I like organization and minimalism and to plan, where maybe in you it's more about leadership or control or like goals or something else. So there's different ways that these things can be expressed in us. And the reason why the elements are so important is because that is how Ayurveda uses nature in a more individualized way. That one of the big things within Ayurveda has to do with the doshas, the 3 different doshas or constitutions, which are how we talk about people as having unique needs. So someone may have the same virus, but have different symptoms or have different recovery. And Ayurveda would say, well, that's because their dosha or their constitution is different. And that is also something that's based on the elements. And then just to touch upon the gunas, the attributes for a moment, the gunas are, there are 20 of these, and there are 10 pair of opposites. So 20 is a lot, but if you think about it more as like 10, and they're on sort of like a scale or a continuum, that there are these words that are very, very simple. We know what all of these words mean because they're things like heavy and light. They're soft and hard, dry, oily, dense, liquid, mobile, immobile, hot, cold. These words that we use every single day. We actually use the words of the elements, not maybe in a daily context, but we might describe people or things in the, like, someone is spacey or someone's kind of airy or more like an earth child. We use that, or they have a fiery personality. But yet the gunas, these descriptors, which describe the elements, are something that we use all the time. And I think that's why, to me, this concept was so interesting, is because we use Ayurveda every day. We just don't know that we're using it. And actually, if we were more dialed into the fact that we were using it, we would be healthier people. Because if I knew that dry was on one end of a continuum and oily was on the opposite, and if I knew that my skin was dry, my digestive system had a drier quality to it, my eyes were dry, my hair was dry, I would recognize those little things and counter them with oiliness, whether that's applying oil externally, taking some kind of oil internally, consuming more healthy fats to help counter the excessive qualities of dryness. And that's just one very basic example. But that's, at the end of the day, how Ayurveda works with health and health conditions. And of course, I'm perhaps oversimplifying it, but in some ways, Ayurveda does very much simplify things, which I think is a huge blessing, because if you're someone that has a very complex health condition, and if you have been seeking out care from different providers that maybe haven't quite zeroed in on what the answer is, it's kind of refreshing to talk to someone who simplifies things and can actually break it down in a way where you could look back at your life and go, oh yeah, like that makes sense. These words that you're using are familiar to me. I can look at how those things happened in my life or where they might be present in my life, and I can see where, this condition may have come from. Yeah. So that's like the long story about.
Yeah, but it makes total sense, honestly. If you think about, people really suffer with a lot of things, and they do go to the traditional doctor, and they're just kind of, do the routine blood work or the routine stuff and send on their way to suffer even longer. And I know from my own experience, just with food sensitivities and nobody really knowing what's going on. I mean, it's very, I can definitely see where there's benefit in doing that. And even seeking a practitioner like you that knows to look for all these other things.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that comes to mind as you're talking about this is, if we could be empowered with these concepts before we get sick, these are things that we can take into our own hands, right? Like, when we work with the idea of imbalance in Ayurveda or something eventually manifesting to a deeper health condition, things start small. And if we can be aware of the small things, then we can, in theory, prevent some of the bigger things. Mm-hmm. So though you wouldn't necessarily go to a provider or practitioner for dry skin is a precursor to other health conditions because it's suggesting that you're missing something. And dry skin could come from, a lack of oil, but it might also mean that you have anxiety, that you have insomnia, that you have an inconsistent life, that you're not eating at the same time, that you're traveling too much, that you're overwhelmed, that you're on the verge of burnout. Like there are all these things that actually, no one would ever think that dry skin,
right,
it would lead into that. But that's just it, is that these little things that we can really be aware of are really telling a story about what will happen down the line if we don't take care of them. So if you could be empowered by that, and that's also another reason why I really felt called to write the Ayurvedic self-care handbook, is that, and like handbook, right? Like to be able for you to use it, just to pick it up and reference it when needed, not as a substitute for a healthcare practitioner, but just to learn about yourself in this way that gives honor and praise and gratitude to the tradition of Ayurveda. I never want to lose the tradition of Ayurveda, but it's also meant to be in a way that's digestible for anyone, that you can pick it up and not, know that there's essence behind this. So there's such a rich practice, but understand what the words mean at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I felt like you really did a great job with that, making it easy to understand and easy to implement things in our life. That's not going to take a lot of time. I loved learning about the doshas, and I have to admit at first I was a little skeptical, but just, not knowing a lot about any of this, I'm like, really? I mean, how can we really put people into these categories? And then as I was reading, I'm like, oh, that's a lot. That's really me. That's crazy. And I just found that so interesting. It's kind of like when you read a horoscope or whatever, and I'm like, how did it know that? That's what it felt like when I was reading that and identifying with which one I was. And I feel like I feel like knowing that now and how you incorporate that, even with like the foods we eat, the time of day we do things, I found that so interesting. Maybe you could just touch on that, the 3 different doshas real quick, and like, some of the things about each one, or, ways that people can find out which one they are.
There are 3 different doshas, and they do in some ways categorize us. And I think I try to steer people away from that specific idea. Yet I know when I'm working with people, I feel in some ways like I'm putting them into a category. The reason why I say that is that these 3 different doshas, which are called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, these are made of 2 elements each. So 2 of those 5 elements that I mentioned, Vata, which is ether and air, Pitta, which is fire and water, and then Kapha, which is water and earth. These 3 doshas are in everyone because they are made of the elements, and the elements are in everyone and in everything. And I said earlier, it's just that the amounts differ. These doshas are first and foremost meant to explain the biological processes. So they are meant to talk about why or how we have movement in the body, or transformation in the body, or immunity, or stability. So for example, Vata, the ether and air elements, govern different things in the body that relate to movement, whereas Pitta, the fire and water dosha, governs things that relate to transformation. So think like digestion and hormones and enzymes. And Kapha, the water and earth constitution, has more to do with our growth and our structure and protection. And so thinking like our immune system, our like synovial fluid or fat tissue, like things that sort of, I always say like cushion and protect, or protective linings. Like those are the things that kapha is responsible for. So theoretically, no one can say that they have only one, because that would be suggesting that they only have the physiology that comes along with that one constitution. And that's why we can't say that you're necessarily being categorized. And I don't know if this languaging is that different, but it's sort of like being typed, like a personality type, but it's not just personality, it's physiology, psyche, you know, your physical impairment, all of those things in one. So there are these different like checklists in a way that go along with these three different doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, that encompass everyone. You know, that our air constitution is more delicate in their structure. So whether that means that they're tall and thin, or that they're petite, or that they have small bone structure, they have smaller facial features, they may have curlier hair, maybe like thin skin, and then also like a tendency toward dryness in all areas of like maybe brittle hair, brittle nails. And they're also more of our creative, spontaneous type of people. But yet again, to not categorize, if I say those things and it turns out that you are a vata constitution and you go, well, I can't be because I'm not creative. Well, that's actually not the case. It's not saying every vata is creative. It just means that there is mobility in that person. So the mobility in that person or in their mind may be the creative component, but it may mean that they're the person that it comes up with a lot of ideas, or maybe they're the ones that have to travel all the time because they can't, like stability just really isn't inherent in them, that they want constant change and motion in every aspect of their life. So that's the vata constitution. Then we have our pitta, which is fire and water. And I always say, you know, if when we're learning these, it can be a little confusing because we have 5 elements, but we have 3 doshas. So maybe we think vata is like air or wind, pitta being fire. So it's our hot, hot-blooded, hot-headed, hot everything, which is not bad. It's just that it's an easier way to get that idea across. So these tend to be our average build, average structure, average sized facial features, average in terms of how they gain muscle mass. So they're not like the sinewy people. They're not like the bulky people. They may be like the mid-distance runners. They're not the sprinters. They're not the endurance runners. So they're kind of middle path, but they are not to be described as average because they're also probably our most eye-centric people and are very sharp. So that fire gives them a sharpness of the mind. So that also gives them a lot of fire in terms of passion. So not to be described as average is a little bit of a joke, but it means like they want to be exceptional. They want to do an exceptional job. They want to be leaders, or they are natural leaders. And those are our more fiery people. And then we have our kapha constitution, which is water and earth. But again, just to kind of give it more contrast, and we single out the earth element, these people they're stronger in structure. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're big people or that they're overweight. I think that's something that I always want to be very clear about, because you don't want to include or exclude yourself based off of just a size element. And it's all meant to be very objective and never meant to create any kind of negative tone. But these are people that are definitely like taller, or have just bigger structure. It could be that they have bigger joints or bigger bones. I always think of like, I don't know why this comes to mind, but female volleyball players are just like these like really strong, tall, beautiful bodies that really to me have like that earth component to them, versus like maybe a thinner distance runner that doesn't necessarily need the height, but they need the like lightness and the speed. So these people are strong overall. They're strong minded, which could translate into being stubborn. So their physical appearance tends to be like bigger eyes, fuller lips, luxurious hair, skin that has lots of clarity to it, sort of like it honestly is kind of like what we revere in society, truthfully. But they are very grounded, and that groundedness can sometimes come across as getting stuck. They don't love change. They want to be comfortable. They don't want conflict. There are natural caregivers, the ones that want everyone to be happy. They'll put other people first, like genuinely, not to have any kind of like recognition placed on them, where like the Pitta person also likes to help, but it is a little bit more of like, look what I did.
Yeah.
The Kapha person would not want that attention at all. They want to be like more behind the scenes, kind of discreet. So that's our Kapha dosha. And so then when you talk about like, so why that would be important, or why we might put someone into a category or a type, is that these qualities, knowing that you have those qualities, like you said, it's like your horoscope. So this is actually kind of like if you were reading a horoscope about your entire life and your health. And basically what it does for us is it gives us predictability. If I know I'm a fiery person, I would know then that my reaction, I should know this anyway, but sometimes it takes someone telling us or reading it that I should know that my stress reaction is probably to fight back, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if I am not the fiery person, I'm the wind, I'm the air, and I have a stress reaction, my reaction is like to get the heck out of there. Like, why would I, fight when I can flee?
Right.
So just little things like that are really, really useful beyond just saying like, these foods are good for you.
Yeah.
And we can assign these doshas to anything. They could be ways, though they were intended for human biological form, we can talk about them in terms of our season. So we have a Pitta season, which is a fiery season. We have, which obviously is summer. We're rounding out now the spring season, which is Kapha, which will last seemingly forever, because we haven't really had a spring, but like, it has like a heavier wet quality to it, which is more like the water and earth element. Even like to go outside kind of smells like the earth. Like you can smell the ground because the air is wetter. And then like the seasons of fall and like early winter have more of the air like qualities, which is when things become very dry, and we're dry inside our homes, leaves have dried up, like everything has that very air like quality to it. So these doshas can be used for seasons, times of day, predictability in terms of our behaviors, our emotional tendencies, our vulnerabilities to disease. Like, I mean, honestly, talking about it, I always wonder, like, why are we not all like, why isn't this like
right
from the beginning of life? And it is like in India, they aren't necessarily practicing Ayurveda, but sometimes you speak with someone that grew up in India, and they may not know Ayurveda, but they would say like, oh, my mom used to give me cardamom or nutmeg, or, when I had a certain condition, or my mom would oil my feet or give me oil to put in my ears. And all those things come from Ayurveda. So it's just, it's never been a part of our culture. But it should be.
Yeah. Well, just, you gave a great chart, and I was just like the digestion and the time you should, this type of like the kapha or whatever does better at these times, and you exercise better at these times. I'm like, that was so interesting and so helpful. It's like, oh, okay, that makes total sense. It's just stuff like that. Seasonal foods, and you go on to talking about like mindful eating and the timing of meals. I mean, I feel like just knowing that information, you can see how it just like creates a healthy balance in your life, and then therefore creates more health in your life. Definitely. But why did you say, I don't know if I heard this or I read it, but why did you say we should always avoid ice?
So there are a lot of guidelines in Ayurveda, and I think it's important to look at them as guidelines, because if we become really honed in on these things as hard rules, they create a lot of rigidity in how we approach life. And some people, that they become overly obsessed with that. Some people are naturally deterred by that. Yet at the same time, there are things that we could say are sort of like, I kind of like have to kind of shake my head a little bit and go, it depends, because it, like, some things depend. Like, is it a season that, like, today, should I be having food that is spicy, or should I be having food that is dry, or what should I be eating? So we have these different things that are sort of guidelines that we should kind of to be like, like, what do I feel like today and what's happening today? But there are these more don't do it rules that are really meant for everyone. And one of those is ice. That if you think about what happens when you're cold, or even just to contrast, like, cold versus hot, like, or think about an animal. Like, if an animal is hot, it splays out on the ground, right? Because it wants to, like, expand and cool off, and, like, let air circulate around it. When we get cold, we tense and we constrict.
Makes sense.
So this isn't just our external body, it's inside. Right. And if you think about constriction, that's not usually what we want when it comes to our digestive system.
True.
But more specifically, our digestive system is referred to, or our digestion is referred to as a fire, and that's a word that's called Agni. And Agni is a fire. Agni means fire, and it's really meant in the digestive concept to explain in a very parallel way how we process food. It's a very, very similar way to how fire would burn something. That if I want to be able to use my food as energy, my fire has to be able to burn through that food. So if I have ice, the fire goes out. And I realize that this, if we're talking very literally, well, someone could argue, well, water puts out a fire. But my argument would be then, like, well, does water create that constricted feeling? Because and that's why I mentioned that first and foremost, even though the whole concept really revolves more around the idea of fire, that we don't want to put out our fire with ice. There's that constriction and that tension. Like, we don't want our digestive system to be tense when we're trying to move things through, especially if you are someone that is tense. That if you have a lot of anxious tendencies, that ice is not even good for your mind. That, like, it's creating, or if you have a lot of muscle tension, which is a whole other topic, that, like, the idea of the rest, ice, and compress, and out, like, the RICE acronym. And
we use it all the time.
40 years old. The person that created that now says ice is not always good. And it's because it constricts blood flow, and blood flow is healing. And if I have a tense muscle or a sore muscle pain, there may be times where ice would be warranted, but the warmth makes more sense, right? Like, if something is hard and I want it to become soft, why would I want to feel that rigidity? So in that way, ice is really more numbing, whereas, like, the heat would be more healing, because it's causing that, like, relaxation to happen. So think about that, like, from the outside. I'm just using those examples because we're external people. We're not internal as much as we are external, because we can see things in a mirror or on a screen, and we have lost more of our internal awareness. So sometimes having these more tactile, objective examples are helpful. But that's where the ice piece comes from. Now, I am not someone that follows that 100%. I would be a liar if I said, because I happen to love bubble tea. So, not all bubble tea, but one specific place that if I went there and didn't have the bubble tea because of the ice rule, I'd be sad. So the thing is, like, you kind of have to know when and where. On the flip side of that, if I went and I wasn't feeling well, or I was cold, or I was tense, or I was anxious, or my digestive system was off, I wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
Because I would know that that is not the time to do that. It's kind of like, is it okay to stay up late tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, that's, like, I have been getting good sleep. Okay, it's fine if I stay up this one night and have fun with people.
Yeah.
So same thing, like, it is a rule, but sometimes
you got to live, and you got to do things that bring you happiness too at times.
Exactly.
So what are the other hard no's? What's a few more hard no's?
Ice is the biggest one. These aren't as hard, but let's just say, like, these apply to everyone. Everyone should have lunch as their biggest meal, because our digestive system is the strongest around the times that the sun is the brightest, between 10 and 2 during the day. So lunch should be our biggest meal. That's an all, everyone sort of thing. Everyone should be going to bed by 10. That's like a loose time. Getting up, maybe by 6. We shouldn't shower after we've eaten. We shouldn't exercise immediately after we've eaten, in an attempt to not create a lot of circulation or to move blood toward our extremities, when what systems need to be working are more in, like, the viscera and the heart of our body. Not working and eating. Actually, a lot of the, like, rules surround how we work with food or digestion. And the reason for, like, there's a lot of emphasis placed on digestion in Ayurveda, and that's because digestion isn't just of food, it's of anything that we take in. So even though we, again, talk about digestion in the tangible form, it's also what I see has to be processed. What I hear has to be processed. And if I can take care of at least one of those and can control how much I'm eating and the environment of where I'm eating, then some of the other things that are a little less predictable, like maybe a bad conversation or some kind of stressful event, I'll be able to process those easier if I'm digesting everything else well. Yeah, so a lot of those rules really do revolve around consumption and processing of things.
It makes sense. There's so many. Digestion is a huge problem. There's so many people struggle with that area, and just having those basic concepts, can be so helpful and cause so much less pain and discomfort, and even, not eating late. You go to sleep easier. Seriously, when you put things in perspective, it makes total sense on why that would work for you in a better way. I feel like in our modern world, we're so busy, we're so consumed, we even get caught up with things that no longer serve us or fulfill us. I felt like you did a great job in your book identifying the need, like helping people realize when change is needed, when just identifying, like, hey, this is no longer working for you. Can you just maybe talk a little bit, or maybe just give us a couple things that wake us up to that fact that, hey, change, do you need to change? Is it time to do something different?
So the first thing to address that, I guess, or the first thing I can say to address that, is the idea of, if you're feeling the same and you haven't done anything, then you've got to change. Yeah. It's like when people say, when I sort of suggest to someone, like, ice cream before bed is probably not great for you, or like that handful of nuts that you're eating as a snack every day may be contributing to some skin condition that you're experiencing. They may say to me, but I've been doing that every day for the last 10 years. And that's my argument, is that you've been doing that every day for the last 10 years, that there's probably something that needs to change within that. But at the same time, I think the bigger picture is really around the idea that nature changes. And if we don't make adaptations to our lives when our lives change or when nature changes, and our main objective is to really live in harmony with nature, then we're missing something. So I love for people that I work with to have, and this depends on what they are dealing with. If it's someone that's having more of a ongoing issue, or if they're feeling well and we're just trying to help keep them healthy. But I always want them to have like a check-in, whether it's a check-in day, a check-in month, and to have that, when possible, coincide with like a natural rhythm. So that could be, it might be something that you would, that doesn't sound like a natural rhythm, like the end of your work week. Like there's something that naturally happens on a Friday that you don't feel on a Wednesday, right? So that would be a great check-in time to say like, gosh, like how did that week treat me? Do I feel good? What should I have for dinner? Should I rest tonight? Should I watch a movie? What are the things that I need to check in with that maybe even I can prepare over the weekend and help make the next week a better week? So it could be something like that, which we may not think of as like a natural rhythm, but it is. Because there's a rhythm to it. I have some people check in during different moon cycles. Could be their moon cycle, their menstrual cycle. Seasons are the obvious one. I want people to recognize that like you can't have like there are foods that work for people. Like sometimes people have a very strict diet that they work with, but to me, that's like something should be done if that's the case. Like if you're limited to a very restricted or limited amount of food and you're having that year round, to me, there's a bigger problem, because we, as again, a part of nature, as animals, should be eating what the earth provides. And that requires a check-in, because we aren't immersed in nature every single day. We have a grocery store. We can go, like I could get a sweet potato, but we're not in the fall. I could get fall squash and it's not fall. Yet at the same time, I could get watermelon in the winter. So unless I know what those things are, so that's also why these seasonal points are really important, is that they're very, very natural times. And also they're bigger spans of time, like you can really dial in and look at some of the minutia of what's happening in your life if you do this more regularly. But we don't all need that. We mainly just need to go, gosh, like summer's coming up and I've been eating these really spicy meals. Maybe I need to start bringing some cooler things into my diet, or I've been sleeping in and maybe I notice the sun is coming up and I'm still in bed. Maybe I should be setting my alarm a little bit earlier so I can get up and be coinciding with the rhythm of the day instead.
Yeah, I thought it was great. You kind of went into just establishing some baselines, like with, as far as like you're saying, like, sleep and digestion and getting your physical and mental energy. I just felt like that was a great chapter to kind of put things in perspective. Like, where are you at in your life, and to see where problems where imbalances can happen. It seems like that Ayurveda is all about these rituals and timing. And it seems like you said to coincide actually with our circadian rhythms, which I think is cool. And I felt like just recognizing our dosha helped in that respect of that, in that area as well. Why do you feel like it's so important? Why are rituals and routines so important for Ayurveda? Like, why is that aspect so important for, health maybe, or balancing? Or it seems like it's really focused on this to this time, do this,
So my emphasis was on that particular component because we do not have that anymore in our lives. We used to have traditions that surrounded nature. We used to have rituals surrounding nature. We used to have a 9-to-5 workday, so like we can look back and look at different things that happened in a more traditional sense, like hundreds of years ago, but we can also look back to like the 80s and a time when answering machines were just becoming available and like no one could reach you at home.
Right.
So we have too many things now that take away routine and ritual from us. So I think my answer is really more that, if you ask why is this so important, it's because we don't have it anymore. And it is, again, something that nature is suggesting. Nature has routine. Like the sun comes up and the sun goes down. The moon has phases. There's so many things that change within nature. And we have our own rhythms too. We have our own cycles that change within us. So these different routines are also really important for just like landmarks also. That if we don't have, I use the word anchors a lot, that I use anchor or tether or pillar or bookend, all these things that basically, or even like a container, that we have no container anymore. Everything is just merging into the next. People are overbooked. People have, like kids have soccer games at 9:30 at night. Nothing about that is normal for humans.
You are so right.
Those things of like, yeah, we can do that, but should we do that? And of course, like when all of society is doing that, yeah, like we have to like uphold our, our responsibilities as like a person, as a part of society. But because we've lost these different anchors, which used to exist, and we can be accessed at any time, we can work at any time, we can eat at any time, we can have any food that we want at any time. All of the things that are meant to keep us healthy, that were a part of our natural, that our instincts, like your pet has an instinct, like your pets have routine. Like they know. We're just outsmarting ourselves. So that was the importance behind this is it is because it's important to our health because of circadian medicine and all of that. But it's important because it has lost importance more so.
You're so right. They don't think twice about scheduling kids' games late at night, and it's like, but then they expect the kid to get up the next morning and be alert, ready for school. I mean, you're right.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
The parent has to get up the next morning and be alert for work.
Right. Or, and even just like you talk a lot about in the book about getting up earlier and enjoying that earlier morning for meditation and those things. But when you're up late from doing all that stuff, I mean, you're exhausted. I mean, and you do talk about not hitting the snooze button. I thought about that this morning. I hit the snooze button. I'm like, let's get up. But it's just stuff like that. You're right. It's just, there is no boundaries. Everything is just overflowing into your life. And it's easy to see where you can become overwhelmed, overstressed, and just constantly living in overdrive, actually, where stress and illness all comes into our lives. Let's just talk a few minutes about just some of those Ayurvedic practices you talk about, like the tongue cleaning and the dry brushing, because I've heard of that before, but just talk about maybe the significance of it, and then tell us about like what specific ones we should buy in that regard.
So there's going along with some of our more like hygienic routines, I guess we could call it, because I think we could compartmentalize a lot of our rituals or routines as having maybe more spiritual health or physical health. And these are a little bit more about hygienic health. I don't just mean like cleanliness, but hygiene in terms of how we're caring for ourselves on a very practical level. So the first thing that we should do when we get up in the morning, or at least one of the first things, is to use a tongue cleaner. And a tongue cleaner is a U-shaped, it's not the end of your toothbrush. It's not a spoon. It's not your toothbrush itself. It's actually a dedicated tool that has this U shape that you can hold by the ends and go from back to front to clean the surface of your tongue, and also to see if you're scraping something off of your tongue. And it's an opportunity to observe your tongue. And this is important because it's the first phase of digestion. And also our tongue is a map to the rest of our body. So there are different things that we can see in reading someone's tongue or diagnosing someone's tongue that personally I use as like an adjunct tool when working with people. It's not that I just look at their tongue and say, oh, you have hypothyroidism, but in theory, that's how it's meant to be used. So there's a lot happening with our tongues. Well, we should be paying attention to our tongue because it does, like, it's showing and telling so much for us. So a tongue cleaner is meant to make sure that as the first phase of digestion that you can taste your food, that you can see any accumulation and that you're cleaning that off. Mm-hmm. And you don't scrape hard and you don't try to make your tongue like shiny and smooth. Okay. Like you do like I say, like it's a center, side, center, side, center sort of situation, okay. Not like hardcore, like it's not coming off. They come in different materials. I do not recommend plastic, though I feel like I've seen plastic before. So usually you're going to see these in a type of metal. Mm-hmm. Stainless steel tends to be a very like neutral metal. You can find them in stainless steel. You can find them in copper. Copper is a metal that's usually more known for the kapha dosha. It's not going to matter too much. Like I would say, like the first foundational thing is like use a tongue cleaner, and then when you're using it, if you really want to get more specific, then you can worry about the material that it's made from. My personal favorite is from a company called Banyan, and it sounds a little weird to have a favorite tongue cleaner, but I have used a lot of tongue cleaners. I have them in like every bag and like pocket everywhere because they're also just like, we use it the first thing when we get up so we can see before we've consumed anything. But it's a really great way to get rid of, like if you eat something with garlic, you can get rid of bad breath with like a couple of the tongue cleaner. To me, it's as important as brushing our teeth. So Banyan Botanicals makes a really nice shape, a really nice material. Those are made, I think, of stainless steel. Another routine that we do, perhaps more on a seasonal level, maybe not every single day like we do with the tongue cleaner, is dry brushing, which is meant to help stimulate circulation and lymphatic flow, and also to slough off any dry skin. And we do that to also prepare our body to receive oil. So the second thing that would come after that is a full body oiling before we shower, so that oil can be absorbed into our skin, that we can have the benefit of the warm grounding qualities of oil. And sometimes oils will have herbs in them, and we might be using that to be healing a certain ailment too. So we actually do that before we shower because oil also can serve as a way of cleaning our body, because most of the oil will absorb, and then anything that hasn't been absorbed will trap any dirt or impurities, and so when we shower, those will just rinse away. And then when you get out of the shower, you haven't dried out from the shower, so you may, the first times that you're starting to do a process like this, you may still need to use some kind of hydration, like a lotion or another oil afterward, but in time you'll have pretty like hydrated skin just from that one oiling. That's a practice called abhyanga, which also is meant to be a practice of, there's some different translations with abhyanga and the word sneha, which means oil, that they also translate into self-love. Mm-hmm. So also just even like the physical touch, like I know people that don't have touch, like to themselves or from other people. So this is also really important. Yeah. Those are some of our biggest parts of our routine. There's also, we use oil everywhere. Like if there's a place to put oil or like in or on, we're putting oil in or on it. So another practice is to use oil in your nose, not just to like put it on your finger and to lubricate your immediate nasal passageways, but to actually try to get the oil to move in more toward your sinuses. And that is for both mental and physical health, that's a straight shot to your brain. And the oil and herbs in the oil are meant to help with memory and mental clarity. And the oil itself can also help act as a protective barrier from different allergens and to keep your sinus and nasal passageways more hydrated so they don't become like a breeding ground for other infections. It's kind of like if you had dry skin and you were exposed to some kind of irritant or a bacteria or virus, you're much more likely to get that into your body than if you had a nice lubricated surface. So it's the same thing, it's same internally. There's also ear oiling as well. And things like eye washing. So it's like, again, things that it makes sense, like why we, seems like our nose and eyes and ears are important, but yeah, we're like only brushing our teeth. So
right. Yeah.
And there are many resources for things like this. And I mentioned Banyan Botanicals. I'm not like sponsored by them or anything, but they're such a great company. They have a lot of resources on their website in terms of like products, but also a lot of information. And I think they're a B Corp. So like they do a lot of like really great things for people. They have great customer service. So that's just like, there are so many companies that are around that maybe even do more traditional types of herbs and oils, but that's like a very easy, at least even for starters, to go to get things from them.
Okay. Yeah. It does totally make sense. And it's funny because I love dry brushing. I just didn't realize that it was a part of the, ritual. It's like, oh, wow, it's so cool. I did one thing. Well, what are some ideas? Like, I love how you talk about one thing, we all have to-do lists in all of these tasks. How can we become more intentional in our lives? Like putting our focus where it matters. I love how you talked about, I love your to-do list and how you put necessary, unnecessary, and just so putting our intention, giving our attention and our energy into a place, where it's better for us.
So I think the best thing when you're deciding to like what things you may want to be adding or modifying, or I mean, maybe that's actually the first thing to ask yourself is, when I look at my life, is there room to add? Should I be modifying, or should I be taking something away? So it's more, the first question is really about context of, if you're making a change, should it be automatically an addition, which is, for whatever reason, that's what we think is like, I should do this, like I should add this, but sometimes it's not about adding, it's about just swapping something out or changing a routine or just like taking something away. I do feel like we obviously need to look at where our needs lie. So I would suggest saying it, like, is your focus now on something that is more mental? Is it something that's more physical? Are you really zeroed in on that it's sleep? Okay, well, if it's sleep, what are a couple of things that we can do regarding sleep? And so you could choose, maybe for someone who doesn't have that specific condition, maybe you say, I want to start something. So I'm going to pick something from the mental health category. I'm going to pick something from the hygienic category. And then maybe I'm going to do something more dietary. I think that's also just to never overload. But if you want to look at something that's more all-encompassing, you can get started in that way too. There's so many. It's a hard question to answer because it's very much dependent upon the person, like so many things in Ayurveda are. But if someone was like, just tell me one thing, get a tongue cleaner.
Do that today. I'm going to go order that.
It takes like 30 seconds to do.
Yeah.
And you'll love it.
Yeah. I think also just, in our day-to-day, it's like, what do we really need to get done? What has to happen? And like you said, like what's not necessary, what can wait? And I think that just helps you kind of maybe clear your mind, be more mindful, what you're doing. And you give a lot more information than we're covering in the book on all that more detailed stuff, which is awesome. But how do you feel like living this way has helped you? And what's your favorite ritual?
For me, Ayurveda has brought intention into my life in so many ways. I would have first credited yoga with helping me to become more self-aware. And it has, and it continues to do that for me. But Ayurveda has so much depth to awareness and understanding yourself and understanding people around you. And though, a couple of years ago, my emphasis was really more about rituals and routines, my emphasis now within Ayurveda is really more of the like psychological components of this, and how we can be using the doshas to help with just understanding ourselves and understanding other people and being, more harmonious with others. So really the greatest thing that comes from Ayurveda for me is that I sometimes will say that like Ayurveda is sort of like your best friend. Like they know everything about you. They know, if you went to a restaurant, what you're going to choose, or, what your reaction is going to be. So it's wonderful to have a health system that understands you. And I think I also often say that it's sort of like being seen. Like Ayurveda sees you and understands you. And I think that's to have a medical system do that for you, I think is outstanding. So that's really the most important thing. My favorite ritual is actually not an Ayurvedic ritual. It's my own personal ritual, which is walking. Walks are non-negotiables for me. I go for a walk every single morning. It's one of the first things I do every single day. I also go for walks as a way of like downloading, mental processing, transitioning. I live 3 blocks from where I work, but I will go for a walk like on my way home. I will intentionally walk like a mile to get home, because that transition is important for me from work to home. And that's where like commutes are valuable, but a walking commute is even better. So that's honestly like, I don't wish I had a more glamorous answer, honestly. I think sometimes people expect me to say like, I rub certain essential oils all over my body with certain crystals. And it's like, no, like there's this really cost-effective thing called walking.
Right.
And anyone can walk.
Yep.
And you can do it anywhere, anytime, any weather even. I will walk if it is -10. I will walk if it is 110.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my favorite thing.
It's funny because I love to walk too. I just love it. I love to be outside. And lately I've been doing it more like not having music, not having, watching something on my phone, just like enjoying your surroundings. Like it's so calming and peaceful. It is true. It's just one of my happy places too. It's funny. That's what I love to do as well. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And what would you say, are the main takeaways that you would want to leave us with today?
I think the main takeaway from our discussion is really just tuning in. Mm-hmm. Like maybe, we talked about how to understand when you need change, or how to know when to be intentional, or where to implement different things in our lives. And the first thing is that we have to become aware. Like we can only take care of ourselves if we know ourselves. So the first step is really to just have a moment to just sit doing nothing and go, like, how do I feel right now? Mm-hmm. And maybe you don't even do anything with it, but that first step of being the observer is really essential.
Yeah, I think so too. That self-awareness, and just, I agree totally. It's just learning more about yourself. That's so good. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to put a link to your book and all your social media so people can follow you. And I really am thankful for you being here.
Thanks for having me.